Good evening and welcome to Times XP Skyline, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dhriti Yatri. Tonight we are looking at 12 stories that look different on the surface, but you know what? Underneath, they're all connected by one big question. What happens when governments change the rules and ordinary people are forced to live with the consequences? Well, tonight we are connecting all those dots. 12 stories, 12 developments, and one long journey across the changing world of immigration, money, law, security, and the Indian diaspora. Well, let's talk about a policy change that could affect Indians living in the United States. If you're working in America on H-1B or L-1 visa, there is a change coming that could affect the company that is sponsoring you. Starting September 9th, 2026, DHS is expanding a biometric entry-exit fee to certain routine visa extensions. According to resources, qualifying employers would have to pay $4,000 for H-1B extension and $4,500 for L-1 extension, even when the employee is simply staying with the same employer. Now, before anybody panics, there is an important catch here. This does not apply to every company in America. The rule, it focuses on what is described as 50-50 covered employer. Well, the company must have at least 50 workers in the United States and more than half of its US workforce should be on H-1B or L-1 visas. So, if you work for a giant product company where visa holders represent only a small portion of the workplace, this particular fee, it may not apply to your company. But yes, for some IT services companies, consulting firms, and staffing businesses, the impact could be bigger. And that is where the Indian connection becomes important. Indians already make up a large share of H-1B system, and many remain on H-1B status for years while waiting for their PR. So think what this means. The employee is the same, the job is the same, the company is the same, but the cost of extending that employee status could increase. The law says employer has to pay the fee. It cannot simply deduct the amount from the employee's salary. But companies still make business decisions based on the cost. And that is the biggest story here. Employers may start reviewing sponsorship more carefully. They may escalate filing before the deadlines. They may rethink long-term visa-dependent staffing. And some companies could increasingly look towards their operations outside US. Well, for Indians, this means that your immigration status, it is not just a legal matter now. It can become a business decision for your employer. And if your employer is already reviewing cost, you may start asking a practical question. Will my company continue sponsoring me? But even if the answer is yes, there is another problem waiting down the road. What happens when the green card queue itself refuses to move? Well, for thousands of Indian tech professionals, the green card journey is not a straight road. You work, you get promoted, your employer files the paperwork, you receive an approval, you watch the visa bulletin, and then you wait. Sometimes you wait for years. But according to the official data, EB2 India has reached its statutory allocation for fiscal year 2026 and is listed as unavailable. While EB1 India has also moved backwards, with warning that it could become unavailable before the end of this fiscal year. And this is where the story becomes frustrating for many Indians. You may have the job, you may have the qualification, you may have an approved petition, you may have spent years building a career in the United States, and still the green card itself, it can remain out of reach because of what? The visa number, it's not available to you. And that is why some professionals have started looking at EB1 as an alternative route. Senior manager, executive, researchers, well, they may potentially qualify for EB1 categories. But then demand increases, even that category, it can come under pressure. So suddenly, the immigration strategy becomes much more complicated. You are not simply asking, can I get a green card? You're asking, which employment category am I in? What is my priority date? Is it current? What happens if I change the employer? What happens if my H-1B extension comes due while I'm still waiting? Well, for people whose eye 485 applications are already pending, the situation can be different because they may have certain protection and work authorization option. But people whose priority dates are not current, they can remain dependent on maintaining their underlying non-immigrant status. Well, you know what? This whole situation, it creates a very unusual situation. A person can have spent 10, maybe 15, or maybe years building a life in the US and still feel that their immigration future, it is temporary. The October visa bulletin, therefore, it becomes extremely important because October 1st marks the beginning of a new fiscal year. So, when fresh visa numbers become available. So, Indians will be watching those numbers very closely because when you have waited years for a green card, even a small moment in the visa bulletin, it can feel like a major life event. And yes, while the green card queue is creating anxiety, there is another issue that is quietly creating maybe trouble for the Indians, even if they have never applied for a green card at all. Well, that is your Indian bank account. You live in America, your parents live in India. Maybe you opened a joint NRE or NRO account with them. Maybe your name was added because you help manage their finances. Maybe you have signature authority because your parents want you to be able to handle things in an emergency case. And you may think, this is my parents' money. Why would the US government care about it? Well, that assumption, it can become dangerous. Under the FBAR rules described by the US, a US person with financial interest or certain signature authority or over the overseas account can have reporting obligations once the combined maximum value of those accounts crosses $10,000 at any point of the year. And yes, most importantly, joint ownership does not simply mean that you report only your percentage of the entire account. Well, the full account balance can become relevant for reporting. So, imagine you have an Indian saving account, your parents' joint account, a fixed deposit, and another foreign financial account. Individually, each account may not look particularly large to you, but the reporting rules can consider the combined value here. And then comes another issue, signature authority. You may not own the money, you may not even receive the money, but if you have the legal authority to control withdrawals or maybe transfer, that can create a separate reporting consideration. Then, unlike the FBAR, Form 8938 is attached to your US tax return and has a different threshold depending on your filing status and where you live. So, ladies and gentlemen, FBAR and FATCA, they are not simply two names of the same form. They are different reporting systems, and you need to understand that. And this is where many Indians in the US, they can make a mistake. They think that my accountant knows about my US salary, so everything is covered. Not necessarily. Foreign financial account can create additional reporting obligations. And what happens if you made a mistake? Then you face the US Supreme Court. Supreme Court's Bittner decision and to official IRS procedures, they may be available to eligible taxpayers who made non-vitiful mistake. The key message is simple. Do not wait for a notice from IRS before understanding your foreign account reporting obligation. Because the Indian bank account may be physically thousands of kilometers away, but your US tax obligations do not stop at the border. And now from America, we move to Canada, where another number is becoming extremely important for Indians hoping to make the country their permanent home. Well, for many Indians, Canada was once seen as a country where the immigration path, it could be relatively predictable. Study in Canada, graduate, get work experience, apply for PR. But the Canadian immigration system, it is becoming much more competitive now. And one number is now making many applications nervous: 516. Well, according to Canada, a recent Canadian Experience class draw issued thousands of invitations, but the cutoff reached about 516 CRS point. Now, for somebody whose post-graduation work permit is approaching expiry, that number, it can feel extremely high because think about the journey. You have already paid international tuition fee, you have spent years studying away from home, you have a job, you have built Canadian work experience. You have started creating a life over there. And then you look at the express entry pool and realize that Canadian work experience alone, it may not be enough. Well, the CRS system takes several factors in account, by the way: age, maybe education, legal ability, work experience, Canadian experience, spouse factor, additional qualification, and most importantly, well, provisional nomination. It can completely transform the score. That means two people with similar jobs can have very different immigration prospects. One applicant may have higher degree, another may have stronger English, somebody else may have French language ability. Another candidate may receive a provisional nomination and suddenly became far more competitive. And you know what? This is why Canada's immigration system is increasingly becoming about targeted selection. The government is not simply asking who wants to come to Canada. It is increasingly asking, who does Canada need now? Healthcare workers, STEM professionals, trade workers, maybe transport workers, French speaking applicants, people in specific occupation, people nominated by provinces. The system is trying to match immigration with labor market requirement here, and that is creating a very different experience for the Indian students. For somebody with CRS score in the high 400s, the question may no longer be, when will my invitation come? It may be, what can I change to make my profile stronger? Well, could you improve your language score? Could you learn French? Could you gain additional Canadian work experience? Could you explore provisional nomination? Could you move into an occupation that is being prioritized? These are not small decisions, by the way. They can affect where you live, what job you accept, and how much money you spend. And yes, then there is another important development. Canada has also shown that immigration rules can change very quickly. A rule can appear, employer can react, applicants can panic, and then the government can reverse or maybe withdraw the guidance. Which brings us directly to our next story. Well, for multinational company moving an employee from one country to another, it is already a very complicated process. There are contracts, there are immigration documents, there are relocation arrangements as well. With that, there are housing. There may be a family travel. There may be a project waiting for that employee. Now, add a sudden immigration rule change. Well, that is what happened around Canada's C20 reciprocal employment pathway. According to the Canadian guidelines, IRCC introduced restrictive guidance on July 29th that required foreign workers using the E20 route to demonstrate an existing employment relationship abroad. That immediately created concern for companies that were planning to bring international workers into the Canadian positions. Then, less than 10 days later, on August 6th, the restrictive wordings were withdrawn. The explanation was that the restrictive wordings had been published because of the document control error. Now, for somebody sitting outside Canada waiting for a work permit, that may sound like a technical government mistake. But immigration rules are not just words on the website. Ladies and gentlemen, people make life decisions based on those words. An employee may resign from a job. A company may book relocation. A family may, prepare to move. A child may be prepared to change school. A company may schedule a project around a worker's arrival, and then a sentence in an immigration document, it changes. Suddenly, everything has to be reviewed again. Well, C20, it is an important part because it is an LMIA exempt pathway under Canada's International Mobility Program. It can provide flexibility to certain reciprocal employment arrangements, and that too without going through the full labor market impact assessment process. So when the guidance it suddenly becomes more restrictive, companies had reason to worry here. And when it was withdrawn, employers and workers received some kind of relief here. But then there is a larger lesson here. Immigration systems are becoming dynamic. You cannot always assume that a rule you read 6 months ago will be exactly the same today. You cannot, assume that an immigration pathway will remain untouched while you are preparing your application. And you cannot assume that a government website is merely administrative information. For international workers, that information can decide whether they get on the plane or not. And yes, Now, from Canada, we move to Britain, where immigration policy is taking another approach. Well, instead of simply asking how long you have lived in the country, Britain is increasingly asking another question: how much do you earn now? For years, many Indian professionals in Britain, they understood the settlement pathway in a very fairly simple term. Work on skilled worker visa, well, complete the required period, meet the condition, apply for indefinite leave to remain. But under the new earned settlement framework described in the reports, well, 5 year expectation, it is changing. The baseline route is now described as 10 years, while higher earners can qualify for faster pathways. Workers earning between 50,270 euros and 125,139 euros can remain on 5 year route, while those earning 125,140 euros or maybe more, they can potentially qualify in 3 year. And that creates a completely different immigration philosophy. Your settlement timeline, it is increasingly connected to your economic contribution now. Well, think about two workers who arrived in Britain at roughly about the same time. They may have lived in the country for the same number of years. They may both have paid the taxes. They may both have followed all the rules. But if one earns significantly more than the other, then their settlement timeline, it could be different. That means salary becomes an immigration factor in Britain now. Well, for Indian professionals, that can be particularly important because the Indian diaspora in Britain includes people across very wide range of professions. They are senior tech executives, they are doctors, engineers, consultants, financial professionals, maybe researchers. But there are also lower paid workers and people in occupation where salary growth, it is slower. Well, for the person earning 125,000 euros or more, a 3 year pathway could potentially become available. For somebody earning between 50,270 euros and that upper threshold, the 5 year route remains relevant. And for people below those threshold, well, the baseline timeline, it can stretch further. And then comes the contribution pillar. According to the framework described by the UK, applicants on accelerated routes, they could need to demonstrate continuous taxable income above a specific minimum during the qualifying period. So it is not simply about getting a high salary once. Your income history, it matters. Your tax record matters. Your employment history matters. And that means Indians need to rethink about settlement much earlier than they may have in the past. A promotion may not only change your salary, it could potentially change your immigration timeline. A career move, it could therefore have an immigration consequences. And yes, then there is the family. Under the framework described by the UK, dependents may not necessarily receive settlement on exactly the same timeline as the main applicant. That means a family could potentially find itself managing different immigration clocks. The main applicant may qualify earlier. A spouse may have a different route. Children may have separate conditions here. So, immigration planning becomes a family planning. And this is a significant shift. Your salary is no longer simply about how much you can spend every month. It could increasingly influence how quickly you can secure permanent status. And that brings us back to America, ladies and gentlemen, but this time, the story is not about somebody applying for immigration status. It is about somebody who had already had something that many immigrants spend maybe years trying to obtain: US citizenship. And yet, according to the sources, he was still handcuffed at the airport. Airports are places where identity is checked constantly. Your passport, your ID, your boarding pass, your security screening, your face, your name, your date of birth. So, what happens when all of those systems appear to work and you are still detained by immigration agents? A US citizen named John Phillip, he was traveling from Atlanta to Las Vegas when ICE agents stopped him near the aircraft and handcuffed him. He had already gone through airport security, by the way. He had already been identified as a passenger. And he told the agents that he was a US citizen. But the agents, they were reportedly looking for another man. The explanation given later was mistaken identity. You know, the agents were reportedly looking for somebody with the same surname and date of birth. But Philip said that the photograph shown to him looked completely different. And that raises a bigger question here. What happens when a government database gets the wrong person? Because let's be honest here, immigration enforcement increasingly depends on databases. Names, date of birth, addresses, immigration records, travel record, previous applications. When all these systems communicate with each other, they can make enforcement faster. But if one piece of information is wrong, the same tech can also make the mistake faster. And you know, that is what makes this story so important. The issue is not that every US citizen traveling domestically will suddenly be stopped by ICE. That is not what the story demonstrates. The issue is the consequences of identity error inside a large enforcement system. And yes, according to sources, there are so many questions about interaction between airlines, TSA and ICE. An agreement allowed certain immigration-related information to be shared, meaning that when somebody is subject to immigration enforcement activity books, domestic air travel information can potentially reach immigration authorities. But again, this does not mean that every passenger is being treated as an immigration suspect, but it shows how interconnected the system has really become. Well, a flight reservation, it can become part of an enforcement process. And that means demonstration matters more than anything else. For immigrants with complicated status histories, previous removal orders, pending cases, uncertain documentation, traveling can require much more preparation now. You need to know your status, you need to know your document, you need to understand whether there are unresolved immigration issues that are connected to your name or not. Because an airport is not simply a place where you catch a flight. For somebody with an immigration issue, it can also become a place where government databases suddenly become very real. And yes, from an individual flyer, we now move to one of India's biggest business names. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the next story is about how a US legal case involving Mr. Gautam Adani has come to an end now. Mr. Gautam Adani's legal battle in America has been closely watched because it sits at an intersection of business, politics, investment, and US law. The case began in November 2024 when US prosecutors accused Mr. Adani and others of involvement in an alleged $265 million bribery scheme that was connected to solar energy contracts in India, though the Adani Group denied the allegations. And now, according to the resources, a federal judge has allowed charges against Mr. Adani and two other defendants to be dismissed after the Justice Department sought to close the entire case. But you know, this was not simply a straightforward victory without any controversy. The judge reportedly criticized aspects of the Justice Department's handling of the entire matter and questioned elements of the government's reasoning for seeking dismissal here. And yes, at the very same time, the judge rejected the whole suggestion that the case was dismissed simply because Mr. Adani had announced plans for a $10 billion investment in the US. Wait, that distinction is extremely important because when one of India's biggest business groups, that group is involved, every move attracts attention. Well, the original allegation involved a lot of money. The company has significant operation. American investors have interests connected to the global businesses, and US prosecutors had taken the case very seriously, serious enough to bring criminal charges. So when the government seeks dismissal, people naturally ask why. Well, was it because of legal problem? Was there a problem with evidence? Was there a change in any sort of priority here? Was the case difficult to pursue, or was there some other consideration? According to the resources, the Justice Department maintained that that investment proposal was unrelated to the decision to seek dismissal, though Mr. Adani's side, they have always refused. So the legal outcome needs to be separated from the political speculation surrounding it. According to sources, the charges against Mr. Adani and two others were dismissed, while charges against four were defended that maintained. And yes, there is a larger lesson for global companies here. A business can be headquartered in one country, operated in another one, raise money in the third, and still face legal exposure across multiple jurisdiction here. Well, that is the reality of globalization. Money crosses border, companies crosses the border, well, investors cross the border, and increasingly legal consequences can cross the border too. For Indian companies expanding into the US, this is an important reminder. The bigger the global footprint is, the more complicated the regulatory environment becomes. And yes, while the Adani case is about $1 billion business and major legal battle, our next story takes us to a much smaller business, an Indian jewelry store in New Jersey. But the amount of money involved, that is still staggering. It took just 45 seconds. 45 seconds to take jewelry and diamonds reportedly worth $1 million from an Indian-owned jewelry store in New Jersey. Navlakha Jewelers in New Jersey was targeted by a group of robbers who moved with extraordinary speed. 6 people were reportedly involved in this theft. 4 entered the store, others remained outside. The attackers used hammers and smashed through the jewelry display. And before anybody had time to fully understand what was happening there, they were gone. 45 seconds. That is all it took those thieves here. Thankfully, nobody was reportedly injured, but financially, if we see, the damage was a lot. And for an immigrant-owned business, the emotional impact goes far beyond the value of jewelry. The co-owner, Sonu Chauhan, had reportedly come to America in 2007. He worked in IT before using his saving to build the jewelry business. Think about that journey. You come to America, you work, you save, you take a risk, you invest your money, you build a consumer base, you create a business, and slowly that business becomes part of your identity. Then suddenly, a group of criminals, they enter and destroy that sense of security in less than a minute. And this is why stories about immigrant businesses are often about much more than crime. They are stories about American dream. For many immigrants, entrepreneurship becomes a second chapter. They may arrive as engineers, IT professionals, doctors, students, but eventually they want to create something of their own. Maybe a restaurant, a grocery store, business of jewelry, a tech company, consulting firm, medical practice, it can be anything. And these businesses often become family assets. They provide employment, they serve ethnic community, they become places where generations of customers, they return. So when a business like this is targeted, the loss is not simply inventory, it is confidence. And there is another challenge here. Jewelry is a particularly attractive target because the products are highly valuable and relatively easy to move. That means criminals can potentially cause a lot of financial damage in a very short period of time. For business owners, that means security becomes a constant calculation: cameras, alarms, security guards, insurance, employee safety. But no security system can eliminate every risk, right? And that is why the most important part of the story is still the fact that no one was reportedly physically injured. Jewelry can be replaced, money can be recovered through insurance, a business can rebuild, but a human life, it cannot. So, for the Indian American community, this is also a reminder of the risk that comes with building businesses in a new nation. The American dream is real, I do agree with that, but protecting that dream is also part of the journey. And now, from protecting your business, we move to protecting something even more fundamental. Well, we are talking about your citizenship here. For most immigrants, American citizenship is the finish line. You arrive in America, you obtain legal status, you become a permanent resident, you build your career, you complete the naturalization process, you take the oath, and finally, you're a US citizen. At that point, many people believe the immigration journey, it's all over. But a case involving an Indian origin man in Kansas is now raising question about what happens when the government alleges that citizenship itself, well, it was obtained through deception. According to the sources, the Justice Department is pursuing civil denaturalization case against the man, alleging that he used fake identity information and concealed parts of his immigration history. Well, the allegations go back decades. According to the complaint, immigration authorities encountered him at JFK Airport in 1991 under another name. In 1995, an immigration judge ordered him deported. The government says there is no record showing that he left the US. Then, according to the allegations, another immigration application was filed under a different identity, with details such as his name and date of birth changed. Years passed, he eventually obtained permanent residency, and then in 2008, he became a naturalized US citizen. Now, the government is asking the court to revoke that particular citizenship. But there's an important legal distinction here. These are allegations in a civil case. Well, they are not by themselves proof that allegations are true. The court still has to consider the case now. But the reason this story is significant is because of what it tells us about the government's increasing focus on denaturalization. According to the sources, the Justice Department has filed a historically high number of civil denaturalization complaints since January 2025. And that means immigration history can come back into focus years after naturalization. Think about how long ago the events were. The 1990s. That is a decade ago. The government is now examining those events because of questions about how the person obtained immigration status and eventually their citizenship. And yes, this is why accuracy in immigration paperwork it matters so much. Names matter, date matters, previous application matters, previous immigration decision matters, travel history matters, and consistency matters. If somebody has gone through multiple immigration processes, it can be tempting to think that old paperwork is irrelevant for you. But the government may compare the old records with the new application. And yes, if there is any contradiction, those contradictions can become important. For Indians, the message is not to panic. It is to understand your own immigration history. Keep copies of your old application, keep approval notices, keep records of previous immigration cases, know what was submitted in your name. Because citizenship is extremely important. Yes, it is. And so is the process through which it was obtained. The government may look at the entire journey, not just the final destination. And yes, now we move to another major US immigration development, one involving expedited removal and the question of how quickly recent migrants can be deported now. A US appeals court has removed a major legal obstacle to the Trump administration's attempt to revive certain expedited removal directives. But once again, let us make one thing absolutely clear here, that this ruling does not mean that Indian citizens have suddenly been placed under a new removal policy here. The case involves certain migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela who entered the US through Biden-era humanitarian payroll programs. So, why does this matter to the wider immigration debate? It does because it shows how quickly the American enforcement system is now changing. The administration wants greater authority to remove certain migrants without going through the full immigration court process that, by the way, many people associate with deportation. The legal battle has already moved through multiple courts, by the way. A lower court had blocked the administration's directives here. Then the appeal court overturned that lower court decision. But the appeals court did not necessarily decide that the government's entire policy was lawful. Instead, according to the reports, the court focused on whether the organizations challenging the policy had the legal standing required to bring the case or not. And that distinction, it is extremely important. Now, this removal is designed to move faster than traditional immigration court proceeding. That means government officers can potentially act more quickly when they identify somebody as being subjected to the removal. And that creates a very different environment for the migrants who are affected by this. For people with complicated immigration histories, unresolved cases, or uncertain documentation, the assumption there will always be that they are in a huge risk, which is true. But again, Indian nationals are not directly covered by the particular policy at issue time. But the broader message is very important. The US immigration system is placing greater emphasis on enforcement. The immigration debate is no longer only about who enters the country. It is about who can remain here, who can work, who can adjust the status, who can be removed, and how quickly the government can act. And that is why immigrants need to understand their status instead of relying on assumptions. A visa stamp does not tell the entire story. A work permit does not necessarily tell the entire story. A pending application does not automatically mean that every immigration issue is resolved. And a previous status does not guarantee a future status. The rules can change any time. Court decisions can change the government's authority, and enforcement priorities can change with a new administration. So, this is a story about a specific group of migrants, but it also tells us something much bigger about the direction of US immigration policy. And yes, finally, we come to a policy that puts a very different price tag on entering America. Well, that is up to $20,000. For some travelers, the biggest obstacle to visiting America may no longer simply be getting a visa. It could be the financial conditions attached to that visa. According to reports, the US State Department has made permanent a visa bond program under which citizens of certain countries applying for B1 business or B2 tourist visas could be required to provide a bond up to $20,000. And among the countries listed, there are 12 Asian nations, Bangladesh, Cambodia, etc. The list is given right on your screens here. But yes, there is one point Indian viewers need to know here. India is not on that list. So an Indian citizen should not interpret that this program as a requirement to maybe suddenly pay about $20,000 to apply for an ordinary US tourist visa. The policy is targeted at specific nationalities identified by the US government based on concerns involving visa overstays, information sharing, screening, vetting, and document security. The basic idea is simple. US government wants an additional financial guarantee for maybe certain travelers, and that guarantee can be significant, up to $20,000 for an ordinary family. This is not a small amount, it cannot be. A family planning a trip to America may already be spending thousands on flights, hotel, food, insurance, and transportation. Add a potential 5-figure bond, and suddenly the financial barrier becomes a lot. And then comes the debate. Does a visa bond actually reduce visa overstay? Well, the State Department has pointed to data from the pilot program showing a dramatic reduction in overstays among affected nationalities. But yes, there is another interpretation here. If fewer people decide to apply for a US visa because the financial requirements are too high, then naturally fewer people can overstay. So the question becomes, is the policy changing behavior after people enter America, or is it changing who decides to enter America in the first place? Well, that is an important distinction here because America's immigration and travel policies have an economic impact far beyond immigration itself. International tourists spend money, business travelers spend money, hotels benefit, restaurants benefit, airlines benefit, retailers benefit, tourist attraction benefit, small businesses, they do benefit. So if people begin choosing other destination because traveling to America that becomes more complicated or more expensive, the impact could spread across the economies. And there is also a question of America's global image. For decades, the US has presented itself as a destination for tourism, maybe education, business, and opportunity. But the more complicated entry becomes, the more people may ask themselves whether it is worth the effort or not. Maybe they choose Canada, maybe Britain, maybe Australia, maybe another Asian destination, or maybe they simply postpone the trip. So this is not only a visa story. This is a story about how governments balance security, immigration enforcement, and economic openness. So we have 12 stories, and at first glance, they may look completely disconnected. An H-1B extension fee, a green card backlog, an Indian bank account, well, a Canadian score, a Canadian work permit, a British settlement system, a US citizen detained at the airport. But if you look them together, the pattern becomes very clear. The world is becoming more complicated for people who live across the borders. And Rudiyatri, this was Skyline, and I will see you in the next episode.